And was I YouTubing this one too? Okay. Okay, I think we're ready to get started. So thanks everybody for joining us. This is the second session. We did one this morning. It was very enlightening and entertaining too, I think. You all did a very good job. So we're excited to have this cast of experts with us who have lots of experience in working with Congress, professional staffs, personal staffs, the members themselves, and they've got a wealth of knowledge to share with us and answer any questions you might have at the end. They did pass out cards, but they're easygoing. If you have a question, you raise your hand and ask it whenever. You don't need to write it down. That'll work out just fine. So thanks all for joining us. I'm not sure if they're YouTubing this one. They did the morning session for some of our locations that were geographically separated. So with that, our first presenter today is going to be Ms. Tamara Hawes. Tamara has worked in LCMC Legislative Liaison Office since February. Before that, she was the Director of Community Relations for Congressman Turner for over 7 years and was the primary liaison to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Prior to that, Tamara was a political science professor at Wright State and an international law professor at the University of West Florida. She also worked for the U.S. Department of State and Senator Trent Loft. Tamara will be talking to you all about how to interact with Congress and some pitfalls and things you should know about as you're navigating those waters. After that, we'll get a congressional overview from Ms. Nancy Dolan and Ms. Melissa Blakesley. Ms. Dolan is a member of the Senior Executive Service and serves as the Deputy Director Legislative Liaison, Office of the Secretary of the Air Force in the Pentagon. She's responsible for organizing and coordinating and resourcing the Legislative Liaison Directorate. She develops and executes the Air Force Legislative Program and ensures the Air Force provides a consistent and cohesive message through congressional engagements, inquiries, and correspondence. She works with members of Congress, congressional staffs, and senior Air Force leaders on legislative issues that affect Air Force programs, policies, and weapons systems. She prepares senior Air Force leaders for congressional hearings, providing critical oversight of the legislative process of Air Force nominations requiring Senate confirmation. Prior to her current assignment, Ms. Dolan served as the Deputy Director, Strategy, Concepts, and Assessments, Deputy Chief of Staff for Strategic Plans and Requirements, and before that, she was the Staff Director in the U.S. Congress for the House Veterans Affairs Committee, where she was responsible for the operations of 3 legislative and 1 investigative subcommittee. Ms. Blakesley currently serves as the Deputy Director, Air Force Congressional Budget and Appropriations Liaison, Office of the Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Financial Management and Comptroller at the Pentagon. She is responsible for liaison services to the Budget and Appropriations Committees, particularly the Defense and Military Construction VA subcommittees of the House and the U.S. Senate. Ms. Blakesley began her career in private industry before entering federal service in 2008 right here at Wright-Patterson as a cost estimator. And we were talking earlier, she left to this day 8 years ago. 7 years ago. She's held various assignments here. When she was here on cost staff, she also supported the F-22 before leaving us in 2012 to go back to D.C. and take a job in the F-35. And she followed that up with several assignments in the Pentagon to her current position she's at right now. So with that, I think we're ready to start. So please join me in welcoming Ms. Hawes to the stage.
Thank you, Ms. Sowers. I appreciate it. Again, my name is Tamara Hawes, and I'd like to welcome those folks that are VTCing in. I know we have some folks from Hanscom that are joining us, so welcome to you all. So let's go ahead and get started. So what I'm going to talk to you about is kind of the interactions that we have overall. And this honeycomb pattern is kind of symbolic of all the relationships that we see when we talk about the congressional relationship with the Air Force, with SAF-LL, with the functionals and PEOs, and with the base. So I've got the Wright flyer here. That's just to symbolize Wright-Pat. But again, each base has their own relationship with SAF-LL, with the Air Force, big Air Force, with the Department of Defense. So the functionals and the PEOs provide information to SAF-LL, provide information directly to their organizational unit. So for what we're talking about today, that would be AFL-CMC. And all of this information is combined, and it ultimately goes to the Department of Defense, who then provides that information to the Department of Defense. So I passed out, or what you have, when you came in, you have a handout that has kind of an overall budgeting timeline. All of that information It's the sheet that looks like this. All of that information typically goes into building the president's budget, which gets contributed back to Congress, typically around the beginning of February. Now, Ms. Blakesley and Ms. Dolan are going to go into a bit of detail about the budgeting process later on in the presentation. But ultimately, all of these inputs all combine and go back to Congress. Now, you'll also have another handout that I brought that you guys can look over in greater detail. This session of Congress is more diverse than it has ever been in terms of who makes up Congress. You have quite a number of veterans. You have quite a number of former cabinet members. You've got a cake decorator. You've got people that were former whiskey distributors. You've got people of all different sorts of backgrounds that are members of Congress. You've got people of different ethnic backgrounds, different religious backgrounds. You've got folks from all different paths of life. But most of you are not going to be briefing members of Congress directly. So most of you are going to be talking to their staff. So what I'm going to delve into a little more directly are the different types of congressional staffers. So most of you probably know that there are different types of staffers. So essentially there are 3 different types of staffers. And there are 3 Ps is what I call them. You have people staff, policy staff, and permanent staff. So you have the district office staff, which are the people office. You've got the DC staff, which are the policy office. And then down below you have the professional/committee staff, which are the permanent staff. So let's talk about those for just a second. In the district office, which I call the people office, those are the folks that interact with the constituents most directly. They mainly handle casework. And when I mean casework, these are the folks that you call when you have a problem. You say, I'm going on a cruise, right? Ms. Sauer just went on a cruise. And she gets ready to go on a cruise, and it's 2 weeks away, and she's starting to get her stuff together, and she looks at her passport, and she goes, oh crap, my passport expires like next week, right? So the congressman's office can help expedite your passport. That's who you call as the district office. The district office also helps if your grandmother has issues with her Social Security benefits. If you have a veteran who has issues with their veterans benefits, this is the office that you're going to call. This office is also the eyes and ears in the district. If there's something going on, if there's a problem brewing in the district, this is who you're going to call. They're also the representatives of the representative, right? That sounds a little monotonous, but this is the person, or these are the people that go out when the congressman is in D.C. They're the ones that are showing up to the promotion ceremonies, the change of command ceremonies, if they happen to fall on a day where the congressman is in D.C. for votes. They do handle some policy, but they're not going to do the brunt of the policy work. They're the ones that may hear about a problem and then take it to D.C. and say, hey, is there a legislative fix for this issue? So that brings us over to the D.C. office. They're the primary policy aspects. These are the ones that get into the nitty-gritty of the policy work. They're the ones that really dig in and say, okay, this is a problem that we heard about in the district. They're the ones that are actually writing the legislation. Okay? So they're the eyes and the ears on the Hill. They're the ones that are listening to, okay, I hear that so-and-so is going to retire. They're not going to run for re-election next year. So there may be an opening on this committee for the congressman or congresswoman if they want to run for chairmanship of this committee. They're also the ones that are negotiators on behalf of the congressman or congresswoman. They're the ones that are trying to get bills through committee and also through to the House floor for a vote. They do some casework, but not a lot. And when I talk about casework, they're the ones, let's say if the Air Force has an issue with something, they're going to contact SAF-LL, and SAF-LL is then going to contact, let's say, Wright-Patt or Hanscom or Eglin for an answer to a very particular subject. That brings us to professional or committee. These are the permanent guys. Most of the time, if you are a program manager or you're a financial person, these are the folks that are probably going to be reaching out to you. So when I talk about the professional staff or the committee staff, these are the folks that typically work for HASC, which is House Armed Services, or SASC, Senate Armed Services, or you hear the term SACD. So this would be someone that works for the Appropriations Defense Committee, appropriations staff, any person that works for the committee staff directly. They are subject matter experts. They are long-term staffers. That's why I say permanent. So they do not work for a member directly. They work for all of the members that are on the committee. So that means they can't be fired by a specific member, right? They work for the committee. So when you find yourself in a position where you're going to have to talk to a professional or committee staffer, there are certain things that you need to keep in mind. So when you find yourself, and it's staffer day is approaching, and how many of you had to do a staffer day? Anybody in this room had to do a staffer day? A couple of you, okay? There are certain things that you need to kind of keep in mind. One, you have resources available to you. One is your legislative liaisons. So if you work in LCMC, you have 2 legislative liaisons that you can go to for help. You can ask, okay, have you interacted with this staffer before? Chances are your legislative liaison has interacted with that staff. They can give you some ideas about the temperament, the mentality of this particular staffer, okay? Other things, maybe your senior leadership has worked with the staffer before. Again, they can give you similar background. Your PEM, your program element managers in the Pentagon have probably worked with this staffer before. They can give you a better idea of what particular things in your program have been hang-ups for this staffer. That brings me to experiences. What have previous briefers done well with this particular staff or this particular committee? What are things that have gone well in your lessons learned, right? What's gone well in previous briefings? What has gone bad? Learn from those lessons. Figure out who the previous briefers were. See what they've done. See what kind of things have been asked or haven't been asked in previous sessions. Chances are, if you know that your program has been in trouble in the past and people have had to go up to the Hill repeatedly, then people know what have been asked over and over and over, right? If your program took a cut last year, find out what the reasons for that cut were and be expecting to have questions about that. If your program has slipped for some reason, be prepared to answer questions about that slippage. If you're running ahead, be prepared to ask questions about that as well. Look at their body language. Most of you can tell when people are getting bored with something, right? Okay, if you see the staffers flipping through their slides and they're still not looking at the slide that you're on, maybe you should just stop and say, is there something specific that you're looking for in this briefing? Don't continue on your same slide. Also be adaptable in your presentation. Again, ask and see, look, I know that you all are running behind by 30 to 40 minutes. Is there something that I can do to get you back on track? Do your homework before you go in. I know it sounds silly, but practice. Try to do your briefing in front of somebody else that hasn't had any knowledge about your program before. Also, look at their bios. If you can't find their bios online, chances are your LL does. Maybe they've had them from a previous briefing. Also, most of these committees publish oversight plans that show what their priorities are for their committee. Use those as a highlight or kind of an outline to see what their priorities are and see where those priorities might line up or not line up with your committee. And again, overall, know who your audience is, because sometimes these committees, when they're coming down, if you're talking to professional or committee staff, often they're looking at areas where they can cut the budget, right? Especially if you're talking about appropriations. If you're talking at personal staff, and personal staff are asking specific questions, chances are they want to keep a program at the base that they're visiting. So again, know your audience. So I was just the warm-up act. Now you're here for the main show. So I'd like to bring on Ms. Dolan and Ms. Blakesley. Thank you very much.
So Melissa and I are going to kind of tag team this back and forth. So I am the Deputy Director of SAF-LL, and Melissa is the Acting Director of FMBL. And do you want to jump? So the first thing we thought we would explain is why do you have two LLs on stage? And that comes back to we have appropriators and we have authorizers. And a great analogy to explain kind of the difference between authorizers and appropriators and also the relationships between them is grandparents and parents. So how many of you have children? Okay, this analogy will work then. So the authorized, kind of like your kid's grandparents. They're the ones that say, hey, if you do really well in high school and you graduate with honors, you know, we're going to send you to Europe for the summer and you can go backpacking and stay in hostels and all this great stuff. And then you as the parents are more like the appropriators going, and who's going to pay for that? And do I really want my kid running all over Europe, you know, at 19 years old? And is this a really smart thing to do? Obviously, you know, different perspectives. You know, you can do this, but like, should you do it? And is there money to do it? And just like, you know, if this was your child, there'd be a little tension between you as the parents and your grandparents. You know, that's the kind of tension that you see on the Hill between appropriators and authorizers. So SAF-LL deals with the authorizers and everyone else. And then FMBL deals with the appropriators.
Yeah, I'll just say that with SAF FMBL, we are a different two-letter, right? So we've got the larger organization, SAF LL. They have around roughly 80 people in their organization. We are a very small, stealthy group who works just with the appropriations and budget committees. We have about 20 people, and so a lot of people don't even know that we exist. And they end up getting to us through LL, who will point them in the right direction if they're having to deal with the HAC or the SAC, either the MILCON or the defense subcommittees. So again, there is, you know, that tension from the perspective of my leadership is up through Mr. Roth and SAF FM and Ms. Thomas, whereas LL is their own two-letter.
So even though there's kind of a back and forth between, you know, the authorizers and the appropriators, and even a little bit sometimes between LL and FMBL, ultimately there's a common goal for both groups, and that is we have to have money to spend on certain things. You know, so you know, even though sometimes there's a back and forth as to who's who and who gets to say what, and if an authorizer says that you can spend money on a program, but the appropriators don't give you any money, if you find money, can you still spend it? Or the authorizers say, no, you can't spend money on this, but then the appropriators give you money to spend on it. Can you spend that money? Back and forth. Ultimately, at the end of the day, we're just trying to get work done.
Yeah, and so authorizers are really more focused on policy, and appropriators really get down to that line item, PE level, actual allocation of funding to programs.
So how do we engage with the Hill? I think Melissa and I probably spend about half of our time actually outside the building on the Hill. Many cups of coffee. We often laugh at the 3 cups of teas book. It's kind of like 30 cups of coffee in DC. But we're really primarily trying to build relationships with staff members and members of Congress. Not just around a particular issue, but kind of just personal relationships so that when an issue comes up, you're not cold calling someone, or you don't have to call and introduce yourself. You know, I'm Nancy Dolan, I'm the legislative liaison. What's going on with the F-35 program? You know, that's not the time you want to be, you know, starting a conversation. We do have formal ways that we engage with the Hill. One of the most visible and common to the general public is through hearings. And hearings are formal testimony before a committee of Congress. There is a legal obligation when you are testifying that you provide full and truthful answers to Congress, whether or not you are sworn in. So a lot of times you'll see on television the dramatic hearings, you know, where the witness is sworn in. That is basically you can commit perjury if you have been sworn in, but you can also violate the law and ethics if you do not speak truthfully to Congress during a hearing. So those are very formal. They're less than 10% of the ways in which that we actually engage with Congress. More often, we're doing briefings of varying sorts. They can be large, kind of half-day or full-day briefings with a lot of different topics, or sometimes it's a very small group going up to talk about a very specific topic. We also obviously do a lot of office calls, and those are from the secretary all the way down to sometimes the two letters. The program managers will have office calls with members or with staff. And then typically at the more senior levels, you'll do quick phone calls. Again, those are a great measure of your relationship, is when you really just want to have a 5-minute conversation. For example, the secretary wants to tell someone that they're going to be getting a certain aircraft or squadrons in on their base or stuff like that. Just being able to have that kind of quick catch-up conversation goes a long way with members. And again, Secretary Wilson was famous for just calling members and saying, "Hey, I'm going to be in your district. I'm doing an internal Air Force event. Just wanted to let you know I'm going to be in town." Most of the time they say, "Hey, thanks for the heads up." Sometimes they'll say, "Oh, well, I would love to join you." If there's an opportunity to praise someone or give an award or something like that, they would sort of join in. So again, there's a lot of different ways, from the very formal to the very informal coffee and phone calls that we use to engage with members.
Now, within the Pentagon, so being a liaison really is a two-way street. You as a liaison are in touch with the Hill. You understand what the messages are, what they are thinking about when you start to talk about your budget. And so what we try to do in the Pentagon is to say, "Hey, I know you're getting ready to make this decision. Let me tell you how Congress is going to react to this, or how we think Congress might feel about this." And a really great example is as we were rolling out the budget this past year, I started to hear bubbling up, F-15. I was like, what is this F-15 that's bubbling back up? And, I think we're going to go buy some F-15s. Well, have you thought about how Congress might think about that? And what do you mean? Well, why would Congress care? Okay, so Rep. Granger is the House Appropriations ranking member. She was the HAC-D chair last year. Fort Worth is in her district where they manufacture F-35s. She might have an issue with us wanting to buy some F-15s, especially if it looks like we are buying them instead of F-35s. And so before we roll out this budget and say, surprise, we're buying F-15s, how about if we go over and have the conversation with her and other members that might be have interest in what we're trying to do with the F-15s, and really explain what it is that we're trying to do, make certain that we're messaging that, hey, no, we're not buying them instead of F-35s, but that we have this other reason that our F-15C fleet is aging, and we need to purchase these new platforms. And so a lot of times when you're sitting in a meeting as a liaison, people that are leading the meetings or attending the meetings aren't really thinking about it from a congressional perspective, and so that's the value that we bring to the table when we do these top 5 or these two-letter staff meetings. Ms. Dolan's already mentioned the staffer days. We bring folks into the Pentagon to do staffer days. We'll bring them over from the Hill, sit them down, and basically have a parade of folks that will come through and explain the programs. I know here at Wright Pat, we'll bring the staffer days to you very often, but we also do some staffer days inside the Pentagon also, both as we're rolling out the budget and right now as we're getting ready to go through the appeals process. Once we get to conference, which means both the House and the Senate have marked and they're ready to compromise, we will bring folks in and have the staffers or bring the staffers in and have the programs kind of talk them through what language in the marks we can live with and what we can't. One of my favorite parts of the job is when we escort members of Congress or staff members to various places, either CONUS, which is within the United States, or even overseas. This is a really great opportunity to get members and staff to our Air Force bases to see it hands-on. It's one thing to see a picture of a plane. It's great to see a video of a plane, but if you can actually go to a base and put your hands on it, meet the people who are flying these platforms, that goes a long way towards building the relationships with your congressional delegations. That's a really great opportunity to go worldwide. and see some of the great work that we are doing outside of the United States. We've had some really great opportunities over the last couple of years and have hit some really great destinations. And it really is an opportunity, again, for members of Congress. They especially love it when they're overseas and members of Congress can shake all of those young airmen's hands and really kind of feel like they're connecting. And so it's a really great opportunity to highlight the Air Force. Anything else? All right. So there's a lot going on with this slide, but we want to explain it to you two different ways. All right. So what we're looking at, and this is assuming regular order, which never happens, but assuming regular order, this is what our congressional timeline looks like as related to really the budget rollout. I'm going to explain it from Congress's viewpoint, so that's going to be really January to December. Ms. Dolan is going to kind of explain it from the Air Force corporate structure, which means everything that's about to happen leading up to the budget release is going to start happening right here at the end of the year, leading up to the next fiscal year. So although the budget releases on the first Monday in February, we, again, kind of back to my earlier example, we can't just surprise Congress and say, here's our budget. So in January and even before, the first opportunity that we have, we go over and we start meeting with members of Congress, the staff, to say, here's what's in our budget rollout. And I like to usually identify those top 6 or 7 issues that we think are going to get really strong congressional interest and sort of kind of prep the field. No, we're not going over and saying, here's a copy of the budget, because that would be wrong. But we can at least go over and have some discussions with them to say, here's what you can expect to see in this budget when it rolls out. Another great example of what not to do. You don't ever want Congress to learn about anything for the first time in the media. There was a lot of flux in the Air Force with regards to light attack. We had say we were going to procure some. We don't need to do any more testing. And then all of a sudden we switched our story and it was like, yeah, there's no procurement money in our budget and we're asking for more money to continue testing. Very confusing, and we're getting questions from staffers and members because they want the platform in their district. What's going on? What's going on with light attack? And we're like, come on, Air Force, come with us and come talk to Congress. And we didn't. And so the way that the committees found out was in the media. The acting secretary, or at the time the undersecretary, made a comment to some reporters while he was giving a speech at the Mitchell Institute, and that took legs, and that's how Congress found out. They are still mad. And we heard about it just a couple weeks ago when we took acting secretary over to meet with the committee staff, and he took quite a few pokes from the staff because they are still unhappy that we launched light attack on them through the media and not through engagement. But we got to that. We get up to budget rollout, first Monday in February. General Pletcher steps in front of the media, gives his speech, then makes his rounds to all of the key committees, gives the budget rollout to them. At that point, we start handling RFIs, requests for information. Quick turn on those, especially with the media. We look for a 24-hour turnover to provide an answer back, and if it's from committee staff, we're trying to turn it in 48 hours. They just need that information quickly so that they can explain it to their bosses what exactly we're seeing in the budget. At the same time, as we are rolling through trying to answer all these questions from the budget rollout, we're already in there, but we go into budget posture season proper, where we go through all that hearing cycle that Ms. Dolan mentioned on the last chart. To say, we have all of these committees, we get the secretary and the chief prepped up, they sit in front of the committees ask them questions, they respond on record. If you guys wouldn't be able to tell this from afar, and so it's like a little bit of insider baseball here, but if everything goes perfectly right with these hearings, it actually comes across as scripted. Not to you guys, but to me, because we've gone out and Ms. Dolan's team has gone out, we've gone to the offices again, building on these relationships. 30th cup of coffee that day. Hey, what is your member going to ask at the hearing tomorrow? Usually, when we do this very well, very effectively, if we usually can get almost every question that the members are going to ask and tee those questions up with answers for the secretary and the chief, so that when they get in front of the hearing and the member, and you can just almost read it word for word, hey, this is exactly what he said he was going to say, and here's the response that we gave you, and they put it back out to them. So very effective if you're able to do that. Once we get through the hearings, then we're going to go into committee markups. And this is when your HASC and your SASC, your HAC, your SAC, both the defense and your MILCON on your appropriators, are individually marking their budgets. Once they have individually marked, and so like right now the HASC and the SASC have both marked their budgets, they're ready to come together for conference, which is to work out the differences between the two bills. The SAC has not marked yet, and so until we have that, we're not going to be able to do that on the appropriations level. And then if we're lucky, we get to the enactment of an appropriation by the 1st of October. We almost always have an NDAA, again, because it's, you know, authorization, not real money. It takes a little bit longer on the appropriator side.
So kind of what Melissa talked to you about was more of a calendar-driven cycle. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about a process-driven cycle. So picking up kind of where Melissa left off, right now we are in what we call markup season, where we just finished the individual House and Senate markups, and then they'll be going to conference. So what we're doing right now with that is we're pulling apart each of the marks, figuring out what are they, what are the implications, and more specifically, what are the drivers and incentives behind each of the marks. Typically, a mark will come from a member or a staffer with a particular perspective or a particular interest. If it's coming from the professional staff, from a committee staff, it is typically issue-oriented. Like Melissa said, for example, with light attack or something, they don't really know where the Air Force is going. Or sometimes they just disagree with where we're going. If it comes from a member office, it's typically more individually driven. And I kind of want to maybe digress for just a minute and talk about political parochialism. So how many people think that members of Congress are parochial? Okay. Members of Congress their job is to work on behalf of their constituents. So members of Congress are parochial, and they are proud to be parochial. Parochial is not a bad word when it comes to a member of Congress. You know, so they are not elected to act on the best behalf of the majority of people in the country. They are elected, their job is to do what is best for the people in their district or in their state. And that's a good thing. For example, you wouldn't want Rep. Turner to vote for a tax increase for the people of Dayton to improve the schools in Chicago. How many people would love to do that? Okay. So you don't want your member of Congress to be looking out for everybody. You want your member of Congress to be looking out for you. When you put 535 people who are looking out for a section of the country together and ask them to work as a body, that's when you tend to get consensus, you tend to get a majority of what's best across the country. But individually, it is not their job to look out for national security of everyone. It is not their job to look out for what is the best for everyone related to the Air Force. It is their job to look out for the safety and security, the jobs and the economic welfare of the people that they represent. So when we think, you know, that a member of Congress will mark something in the Air Force budget, you know, because they want to increase the amount of money that is spent to buy a certain type of airplane that is manufactured in their district, you know, and we think, well, shame on them. Don't they understand the bigger picture? No, no. Congratulations to them. They're doing their job. They're looking out for the people that work for that company in their district. So you really have to understand their perspective and where they come from and the value system that they're operating on. It's very different from ours. It's almost 180 degrees. We're expected to do, you know, the right thing for the most number of people. We look at the strategic level. They're the exact opposite. So one of the things that we do during the markup season is we look at these marks and we try to understand the incentives behind them. Again, Melissa used a great example with the F-35s and the F-15s. So we know that if we wanted to, buy some of the F-15s and it gets marked against, then we know we have to look at those folks who are going to be impacted in their state or district by a potential reduction in the buy for F-35, go to them and explain to them, we're not reducing, you're not going to have a negative economic impact in your area. This is, over and above, this is additional, or this is being paid for in another way. So we do that throughout the summer. Basically, they go to conference, they compromise, and then ultimately we get a bill. And hopefully, traditionally we tend to get an authorization, the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act. And then hopefully we end up eventually at some point getting an appropriations bill or a budget. The same time that we are looking at markups, we are also starting to talk internal to the Air Force about the FY21 budget. So the FM community, the A8 community is starting to look at where do we want to put our money for next year. And what the LLs do during this phase is we look at two things. One, as I've already talked about, is what is the impact to Congress and different members of Congress of those decisions. But more importantly, how do those decisions differ from the decisions that we made last year? So it is not uncommon, although it is a little unfortunate, but sometimes we will plus up a program in one fiscal year and then we'll disinvest in that same program the next year. That is a hard story to tell on the Hill. So what the legislative liaisons do as we go through the budget discussion process is we raise those different issues. Not necessarily to change the mind of the FM or the A8 decision makers, because they have to look out what's for the best for national security in the Air Force. But we raise it to make sure that everyone understands this decision, that Congress gets a vote on that decision, and they're probably not going to vote your way. So just as you put your budget together, make sure that you put this in the questionable column as opposed to the supported column, because that then can potentially affect down budget decisions that are made. So we try to kind of serve as counselors, advise, counsel, and clean up is kind of what we talk about, our job being. This is the phase where we're advising the Air Force how things might play out. Come October, when the big decisions have either been made or we know that they're not going to be made, that sometimes is just as important. We kind of, in the LL world, we start getting ready for posture season, for the hearings that are going to come next year. By Thanksgiving, we try to have a draft of the posture statement with CX, which is kind of the top four's CAG office. They're the ones that actually write the posture statement with input from LL, FMBL, and PA. And what that story is it's the connective tissue from what we did and said we were going to do last year and what we need to do next year. It's the high-level themes. It ties to what big DOD is doing. It ties to what the administration is doing. And it kind of tries to present an overall cohesive picture of the Air Force, what we're doing, and why we need the money to do it. And then, once we come back from the holiday break in January, it is full-blown posture season for us for about 4 months. Tons of office visits. We did over 172. I don't know if you knew that. We did over 172 office visits in a 9-week period last year. And that's the secretary, the chief, the under, and the vice that go over, as well as a bunch of LL visits, a bunch of FMBL visits, and some two-letter, visits. So it's kind of a full-on assault with the president's budget up on the Hill. Hearings, the actual posture hearings tend to be March, April, and then there's usually a little bit of about a 3-week lull before then they go into the markup season, and we start it all over again.
How many of you have heard the Air Force we need? Yeah?
All right. That's good.
Yay! Our personal blood, sweat, and tears went into that campaign to get congressional support. We got it. We have language in the House bill. I'm not sure on the authorizer side. We have language, which is huge, that they would take the time to put language into the bill that says we support the Air Force we need. We have the Air Force Caucus, who has sent a letter across the entire Senate saying we support the Air Force we need. What do you think is going to happen if our FY21 budget doesn't build on that? And like all of a sudden we've gone in a different direction and we're no longer talking about the Air Force we need. We've gone on to some other topic. We're going to look schizophrenic, right? So we have to make certain that year after year we build on the messaging that we get from last year, right? So whatever changes and big muscle movements in this budget that we're going to roll out next February, it better be in support of the Air Force we need. It doesn't have to be called that, but it ought to be getting us in that direction of what the last secretary was trying to message. All right, we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on this chart, but this is just to kind of give you some faces of the most important committee leadership for defense appropriations and authorization. So on the left side, we have the SASC and the HASC. So we've got Inhofe and Reed, and then chairman and ranking of the HASC is Rep. Smith and Rep. Thornberry. The SACD, Senate Appropriations Defense, we have the chairman, Senator Shelby, and then Senator Durbin as the ranking. House, you'll recall, has flipped to Democrat control. So we have Rep. Visklosky and Rep. Calvert now as the ranking. For the SAC Milcon VA, we have the chairman is Senator Moran, and Senator Schatz is the ranking. Not up here, but equally dear to our hearts is Senator Bozeman, who would do anything in the world for the Air Force, but he is the SAC-M chairman. And then down below on the right-hand side for the HAC Milcon VA, we have Rep. Wasserman Schultz and Rep. Carter. When something goes wrong or we need to speak about something, the first folks that we go to for engagement are these folks right here.
So I would say these folks are our exception to my comments before about politics being parochial. So when members are chairman or ranking members of committee, their perspective kind of goes up a level, if you want to call it that way, in terms of being more strategic. So all of the folks that you see here, they have responsibility for defense issues writ large. So while they will still have issues that are specific to their state or to their district, they are also responsible for the bigger picture of the other members on their committee, as well as, in our example, for the Air Force writ large, for national defense writ large. So again, once they get into kind of the leadership roles within committees, they then have kind of a broader responsibility, as well as their specific parochial interests.
Yeah. And I would add to that is beyond parochial interests, they also work very well together.
Yeah.
You stop seeing this politics, this division of party when you start talking to them. I just had the acting secretary over, met with Visklosky and Calvert together at the same time. Very collegial. It wasn't this D versus R kind of a mentality. It was what is the best thing to do for DOD. All right, so the money chart. And I learned from the last time that I'll need to explain a little bit more on some of these terms. So bear with me, I will go a little bit more slowly on this. So where we are right now, 2018, we got a bipartisan budget agreement, a BBA. In 2018, we got that for 2 years. So we got $700 billion in 18, 716 in 19. It was a huge win for defense. It was the largest defense budgets we've ever had. In FY19, we've already been able to secure a disaster supplemental. This one took a long time, longer than it ever should have. It was not because the Congress said we don't care about Tyndall and Offutt. It was not that at all. It was that all these other competing interests that kind of ebbed and flowed, bubbled up, got pushed aside. But it was a lot of politics behind this supplemental. But we've been able to secure $1.7 billion in disaster recovery for Tyndall and Offutt. It does not even get us close to where we actually need to be for these disasters, but it was finally a huge win at the beginning of May when we were able to get these two bills. However, FY20, we are back and we are in a whole new ball game again. We do not have a BBA. We are waiting patiently for a BBA. The Senate doesn't even want to start marking until we have this agreement in place. If we do not get an agreement in place, there's two things at play here. If we don't get an agreement in place, sequestration is going to come back, and that's where you automatically have to reduce to particular spending caps. That spending cap for FY20 is $576 billion. Our budget request was $750 billion. I don't know how many of you were around in FY13 when sequestration hit, $7 billion impact to the Air Force. If this happens this time, it's a $28 billion impact to the Air Force. This is huge, and we're going to have to make very, very painful and serious decisions if we are not able to get a BBA. And that's not to say that there's anything that we can do collectively to get a BBA, but it's that Congress and the administration have to come to a compromise on what that's going to look like. It seems like it ebbs and flows. Every day I pick up my phone and I'm reading my budget daily report on what's going on in Congress, and one day we're one step closer, the next day we're two steps further back. Something else that is in play is the continuing resolution, where we say, you know what, we're going to punt, we're not going to appropriate any funds, and we're going to just say keep at the funding levels you are at or last year's levels for 3 months, 6 months. Right now, there's a lot of traction, and it's not coming from Congress, but there is traction for a full year continuing resolution. That would be extremely impactful to the DoD, talking about new starts and increased budget lines. And so we have to monitor this very carefully. So the kind of, if we don't get a BBA, we go into a CR, we still don't have a BBA, come January, we hit sequestration. And so if you're being told, you say, okay, start your FY20 off, spending at the same level you were spending at 19, you do that for 3 months, and then all of a sudden that trigger in January hits and you drop to whatever the Air Force's portion of that 576. I mean, that's a huge drop. And so we're going to have to really work to make certain that doesn't occur. But where we have to deal with is, we have to have the administration, we have to have Congress sit down and really come to settle this bipartisan budget agreement. And I don't know if you're optimistic, but I grow less optimistic by the day. But I was all the way to the nothing's going to ever happen, and then we got $1.7 billion in disaster funds. So just like that, things can change. Anything you want to add? No. Okay. All right. Oh, this is your turn.
Yeah. So right now, the NDAA has gone through the House. So the House Armed Services Committee has voted on their version of the authorization bill. The Senate has voted on their version of the authorization bill, and they are getting ready to go into conference. We don't have a formal conference established, so the process is they're always talking back and forth, but there is a point at which the chairman of the HASC and the chairman of the SASC will sign a letter that basically says we agree to formally conference. And then both sides identify members who are kind of on that task force, if you want to use an Air Force term. And then they actually kind of do some formal talking. So we know that they're talking. We know that they're sharing versions of their bill, but they have not gone into formal conference yet. But on the authorization side, both House and Senate, do have their bills. It's a little different on the appropriation side because the SAC hasn't done their markups yet. So we have the House side, but not the Senate side. And I think, hopefully they will conference, before on both appropriations and authorizers, that they'll do a formal conference before August, the August recess, because then it kind of enables us to do a lot more work with the staffers. But it's possible that they'll decide not to conference until they come back in September. If they don't conference before August, then we probably are going to see some version of a CR, just because it's too hard to conference and vote before 1 October. That'll only be about 6 weeks, and that's not really that much time. But if a CR is the plan, one of the things that happened last year, if folks remember, is we did get a defense appropriation bill on time last year, so before 1 October, which is why we all had to work while everyone else was furloughed. That was a great thing for us. However, the lesson that was learned in Congress was if defense passes, then you have no leverage. So there's kind of some rumors. I'll put it this way: the lesson learned on the Hill was that the defense appropriation bill is a huge leveraging point for all of the other budget bills. So we're not sure exactly what's going to happen this year, and how the defense bill will end up getting played into that. I don't know if you have anything to add.
No, I think you're spot on. I think that we probably will, especially that the Senate continues, at least on the appropriation side, the Senate continues to slip. I think we will find ourselves in at least a short-term CR situation, but I hope I'm proven wrong. All right, so how can you help? I know a lot of you probably are involved in the creation of JBooks. I would ask that you focus on the why when you're doing your JBooks. Very often, Rep. Visklosky actually said this to the acting secretary, that a lot of the reason behind the marks that we got on the House side was lacking justification. And so that should be telling to us that we aren't giving them and we aren't giving the committees what they need in order to really understand the program. And we talked about this last time, but when you're doing your JBooks, start at the top and not down where I know we're at the analyst level. You guys know more than anybody in your program about, or not your program, but in your off-program office about your particular program. Your boss knows a little bit about what you're doing, but not nearly the level that you do. Take that to the next level, right? And then the PEO, they can get little bits and snippets of what's going on, but they certainly don't have that layer of detail that you do. From there, right, it goes through the MAGCOM commanders, it goes over to FM. We don't know nearly as much, right? We're sitting there in DC. We're not even connected physically to you guys here. And from us, it goes over to Congress. So think about that gap of layers of understanding between that analyst who knows everything, the ins and outs of every program, to that member of Congress who not only is looking at your program, is not only looking at the Air Force, but is looking across all of the DoD programs and trying to keep all of that together. Your program is just a tiny sliver of what's in their big head. So try to keep it high level, really get at the why, explain changes from last year, because I kid you not, I want to show you this. This is an actual PSM's group of JBooks. When I sat in your seat, or here at Wright Pat, and I'd be working on these JBooks, I'm like, I don't even know who's looking at this. Is anybody looking at this? And I may not have given quite my A+ effort when I'm writing out the justifications in my JBooks, because I don't really have an understanding of who the audience is. And now that I work with the audience, and I could show you, she sent me all these pictures of all these markups and everything. They read every single page of the JBooks that we sent over. And I think Jen Santos said it best when she was here. She talked about how her set of JBooks for herself was as tall as she was. She reads every single page. She marks every single page. And I can guarantee you They've gone back and they've looked at last year's and the year before that, and they know when there are changes in these J-books, and they want to know why. And so if you, as that analyst who knows every detail, if you know that last year we said we were going to buy 5, and this year we said now we're going to buy 10, you need to explain why, or a decrease or anything, a schedule slip, a schedule increase. Put those things that are going to seem abnormal from last year's submission into this year's. Make certain that you are consistency of messaging so that when congressional members are always getting, there needs to be, and we were having a good conversation about this at lunch, that the Air Force doesn't always do a really great job of saying, this is the Air Force message, and then everybody across the Air Force speaking with that same message. That's an area that we need to work on. And again, back to, you guys know your program better than anyone. If you see problems or you see issues that need to bubble up, don't expect that people above you in seniority know that unless you talk to them and up-channel those issues as you begin to see them. Like I said, they may not be focused in on that, and if you don't speak up and say, hey, we have a problem here and we need to elevate this, they're just not going to know. So I just ask you to do that.
And you'll also have potentially the opportunity to engage, with district staff. They are the congressmen's, representatives at the local level. So one of the things that we ask folks is, if there's an event going on, and it doesn't have to be a big event, it doesn't have to be a budget event, it doesn't necessarily have to be something that Congress has been invited to. But for example, if you're doing, your, Airman of the Year, or you're, giving some sort of, graduations and that type of things, you can invite the district staff to attend that. If you're having your unit picnic in the summertime, you can invite your district staff to come to that. It doesn't have to be, 100% Air Force programmatic professional. You can be inviting them because they are, in essence, your sponsors. So anytime that you would want your grandparents, to come to something, you can reach out, or you can kind of raise it to your leadership as, would this be an event for, the district staff to help build the relationships? It's important to be able to have those connections. And we kind of never think of inviting our sponsors, to those kinds of events, and they love to come to them. Consistent messaging, Melissa has already talked about it, but it is important, again, not only in formal professional settings with staffers and members of Congress to keep the message on a program consistent, but also when you're just talking to them they're kind of asking, questions outside of that, is just remember you're always on with a member of Congress, or a congressional staff. So you just really have to make sure that you understand what the Air Force messages are. As Melissa said, we don't always do the best job at kind of making a decision as to what it is we're doing, having a message, and then pushing that message out. So we encourage folks, if you are going to have an engagement or potentially, have an engagement with a staffer or a member of Congress, and you're not sure what the message on a particular issue is, ask your LL, ask your leadership, reach out to public affairs, and ask them, what are the talking points for this, or what was the decision, so that you'll be sure that you know. It should always be pushed out, but until we get really good at that, the pull might also be needed. Your MAGCOM LLs and the Air Staff LL and FMBL are also resources for you. I think in the morning session there was somebody who was going to be on a team briefing a congressional subcommittee, and just kind of wanted to know, where do I start? How do I figure out who the members are that are going to be there and what their interests might be? That's where you reach out to your LLs. That's our job. That's what we do for a living, is to know members, to know what they're interested in, and to help the staff in the Air Force be able to have good conversations with Congress.
think we're ready to open it up for questions.
Yeah. Ask questions.
So we talked about Congress's job as each individual congressperson's job is to be parochial. Well, it's been several years since I remember seeing any reference to this at all, but does the word frack still come up at all, or is it still a, the Air Force is interested in not bringing it up and Congress wants nothing to do with it? Just curious what your thoughts are on that.
I've heard it bubble up.
Yeah.
Every now and again, the word will be bandied about, not ever with any seriousness, which is unfortunate, but you're right, it's back to being parochial, right? Everybody agrees that BRAC is probably a good idea until it's, oh, you're taking what from me? And that's when it all falls apart. So.
I think I would say there's more discussion of realignments than closures. So I think if there was a way of decoupling, or we have seen a couple of instances where there's been trades, both within services and across services. So, for example, some joint bases were uncoupled, into, in an Air Force base or an Army base, and then there was another base that was kind of turned into something else. So there's a little bit more openness to the idea of realignments than closures. Other questions? Doesn't just have to be on this material. If you have any questions about Congress or what's going on in D.C.
Okay, so this morning we talked a little bit more about parochialism, and we asked about a little bit about they all take their camps, right? And so they're all their corners. Questions about earmarks. We used to have earmarks, but they went on the wayside. So there is some dialogue that we should bring earmarks back that gives members an opportunity to be parochial for their district while still building relationships and talking to one another. Maybe we wouldn't be so polarized and we might see some more good things outcome. Do you mind sharing your thoughts with them on that?
Sure. So I'm actually a fan of earmarks, and that comes from, in 2008, I was a legislative fellow working in the personal office of Congressman Mike Michaud, 2nd District of Maine. And he gave me the office's earmark process. Every office is different, so this is 1/535th of the ways that it could be done on the Hill. But it was a fairly transparent process, and it had a lot of advantages to it. It was a nominal amount of money. I don't recall exactly how much. It was probably less than $1 billion. I mean, tiny, tiny, tiny percentage of the overall budget. And it did a couple things. Within the district, within the office, is it really forced us to talk to organizations and industry across the district. We kind of, typically had our folks, that we would work with all the time, supporters of the congressman. But when it comes to the earmark process, it has to be open to everyone. So we would get inputs and have dialogue with organizations and companies in the district that we wouldn't normally talk to, which is a good thing. It's a very good thing for those constituents. The other thing that it did was we had to talk to other members of Congress with either similar issues, similar industries, or sometimes competing industries or competing companies. There was nothing that could kill an earmark faster than if one congressman wanted to put money in one company in their district and another congressman wanted to put this, equal amount of money or more or less in a competing company in the same industry. Because that's literally, the money just cancels itself out, and committees don't like to do that. So if we knew that we were going to have an earmark for one of the blueberry, industry, parts of the blueberry industry in Maine, we would go and talk to folks in other districts, in other states, other fruit-producing, areas of the country, and make sure that if we were going to be investing in blueberries, they were investing in pineapple or cantaloupe or something. So we used to call it the fruit bowl, literally. And there were 4 or 5, members of Congress that kind of invested earmarks into the country's fruit industry. But we kind of spread it out so we could be supportive of each other without necessarily being competitive with each other. Those were members of Congress that we didn't really have anything else in common with. We weren't on the same committees. We didn't, the members didn't socialize together. So outside of that earmark process, we probably wouldn't have talked to them very much. We wouldn't have built relationships. The same thing between member offices and committees with relevant earmarks. So again, Mr. Michaud was not on the agricultural committee, but we always would talk to and kept up relationships with the staffers on the agricultural committee, because we knew that probably every year we were going to do an earmark on the fruit bowl. So, so we would kind of build those relationships that otherwise would not, have come into play. And with those relationships comes the ability and the willingness to negotiate, to share votes, to be supportive and stuff like that. And you got some of the bipartisanship. They weren't always of the same party, and you had some of the relationships, that kind of helped to get to consensus and kind of move things along a little bit more. I think should they bring earmarks back, especially in today's day and age, I think there's a way of doing it so it's much more transparent, and there's a lot more opportunity, for people to kind of do some checks and balances and put it out into the light, which I think was one of the big kind of criticisms of the earmark process in the past. That's my perspective.
I completely agree.
Okay.
The bipartisanship that it garners for a bill. I mean, this idea of all of these bills that are constantly now, especially like the defense appropriations or the authorization, where these things are being voted on, along party lines. That's something that started occurring for many other reasons, I'm sure, but also at the same time that earmarks started to disappear. When you were able to say, I could throw a little money in and I can take this back to my district and say, I was able to do this for my district, therefore that's why I voted for this bill. A lot more bipartisanship then. I think it would be helpful to bring that back.
Other questions?
Okay, so this morning, we talked about, you were given some advice regarding when the staffers come and talk to the program, and if they can make it more visually, don't set them in a room and let them describe everything. So I asked if you had any examples to help them, because we all work in program offices with push paper. Our briefings are normally just that, our briefings. We don't have gee whiz stuff that we can take them out and let them touch. So I was looking for any kind of examples that you might have seen in your careers that can help them make that connection with the staffers that they remember. Kind of like they remember more by doing than by just saying.
Yeah, absolutely. And Tamara, I don't know if you want to talk to kind of like the scope of staffing.
Yeah, so staffers are overwhelmed with the amount of folks that they see and talk to in a day and the amount of information that they receive and they take in. So staffers have different swim lanes. So staffers literally can get reams of information in one day. So how many of you have seen the schedule for your PEO director in a day? Or let's say if you've staffed a 2-star or a 3-star, they literally meet in 15 or 10-minute increments throughout the day. Congressmen do it, congresswomen do it, and then their staffers do it as well. So if you go to Capitol Hill, you'll literally see staffers meeting in every nook and cranny. We have cubby holes, right, the size that are this big. That's some of our workspaces, right? Their cubby holes are about half the size of that. And I kid you not, like Melissa was showing, the reams of paper, they can get that amount in one day for meetings in one day. And they are going through that amount of information. So we were talking after the first session. You literally need to provide information in like sound bites to them. And if you hook them, they're going to come back to you for more information. Like, okay, I got this, I understood it, but I need to dig deeper because my boss wants more information. And then that's when they're going to come back to you. So if you can consolidate it and get their attention, then they're going to come back to you for more and more information. So as concise as possible to capture their attention, that's what you need to do, because they just have such a volume of information that they're being presented with, and it's overwhelming. So if you're using 5 sentences to convey one sentence, you've lost them. So
Yeah, I think it's one of the things that's important to remember is, again, talking about models and the models we operate with. So you guys are about an inch wide when it comes to all national security issues. You know, your program is about an inch on the scale, but you are miles deep. You know, a congressional staffer is the exact opposite. They are a mile wide. You know, it's not uncommon for a staffer to have the national security portfolio, which is DoD, all 4 services, Coast Guard, and some Department of Homeland Security can kind of fall in there as well. International relations, which is, you know, State Department, World Affairs, sometimes trade falls into that, as well as Veterans Affairs, which is everything relating to veterans and the constituent casework that goes with it. You know, that's kind of a normal, you know, portfolio for either an MLA or sometimes they call them national security advisors and stuff like that. So in essence, you are covering about 6 departments in the cabinet and everything that those departments do. So again, you are a mile wide, but you're about an inch deep as a staffer. So when a mile wide and an inch deep meets an inch wide and a mile deep, not so good. You know, you can try to take them in and down. You're probably going to lose them along the way. If you come up, you can meet them at that intersection of an inch wide, mile deep. You know, there's again, just draw the graphic. There is that little square where they cross. That is where you want to meet the congressional folks. You know, and then they may pull you a little bit wider. How does this relate to the Navy program? That sounds really similar to it. You know, you may be able to pull them down. Tell me more. I need more information. Come back. When we talk to folks that are going over to the Hill, we say, use the onion, you know, as a model for how to do your conversation. Give them one layer, you know, a couple of sentences, you know what your point is, and just say it. You don't need a lot of flowery words. You don't need to beat around the bush. Just give them your point. You know, pause. You know, if they haven't moved on to a different topic, give them the next layer. Pause. If they haven't moved on, give them the next layer. You know, typically at that point, they'll be out of time. They'll have a question, or they'll need to go. You know, they'll move on to another topic. You know, and then you might have to follow up in a day or two and say, you know, hey, here's some additional information, or, you know, did you have any more questions after the opportunity to look at, you know, the material? So it may take you 3 or 4 engagements to get a half a mile deep. That is much better than trying to get a mile deep in one engagement. You know, not only do you get your information across, but you're building a relationship because you're having several conversations with them, and you're basically giving them the information at the pace at which they can absorb it within everything that they have to do.
And then also, I think what Ms. Sowers was also asking is, how does WritePat make our briefings interesting to somebody? Like if you know, we make the suggestion, we need to be hands-on with them. We need to have them crawling around on jets or you know something like that. But that doesn't really exist here at WritePat. one option, honestly, and at first it sounded kind of silly, but I think it's a great idea, is just take them over to the museum and show them what plane you're working on. You know, there are some staffers who are so brand new that would be eye-opening for them. We just got a brand new SACD clerk, has absolutely no defense background. We're going to bring her over to the Pentagon, sit her down, and say, "This is an airplane." Sometimes it sounds, and that because you guys are this deep, right? They're still up here, and that intersection might simply be, this is what a B-2 looks like. And this is what it does, you know. So I think there are some other ideas I might have, but I'll talk to you offline on that.
Right, and if you can work numbers into that while they're here. So, for instance, you talked about bringing district staff along. Senator Brown has a new district staff member, hasn't had any interaction with the Air Force at all. Well, we're bringing him onto Wright Pat in the summertime, and we're giving him introduction. So, but before he comes onto Wright Pat, I have a 2-page memo about all the major organizations that are here at Wright Pat. He's going to get that as a primer before he comes on.
2 pages.
Right? 2 pages.
Not 10 slides.
Nope, 2 pages.
2 pages.
Yep. Paragraph.
Yep.
So,
Layers.
Yep. I think there was a question in the back, ma'am.
Can you explain the reclama process a little bit? One committee you take a mark, and that comment may be change in acquisition strategy. So you do the requirements, you pull out the reclama, and you write that. But then the next mark comes, and it's still the same comment. It feels like sometimes when you write your reclamas, it's not getting to the right people.
Your reclama, the response that you have written, their mark is on what's in the J book. And so what that message should tell you is the J book was equally confusing or unjustified to both committees, but they haven't actually talked yet about that particular mark. Now, what I will say is, we had the hack mark on the appropriations. We took our top. I think we ended up sending over 21 appeals papers on the hack mark, and we gave them to the Senate because they haven't marked yet. So that's our process, is to say, okay, everybody stand down, take a look at the hack mark, give them to me in a prioritized order. Let's, as an Air Force, prioritize, integrate them, and reprioritize them, hand this over to the Senate committee in hopes of impacting their mark. But 21 out of all of the marks, odds are maybe the one that you wrote didn't make it out of the door. But I think what I would say is both committees looked at the justification and had the same thought. I don't think it's a matter of there was a mark on one, we provided that information, and they still said the same thing. I don't think that's the case at all.
Partly out of curiosity, you talk about how much work all these staffers have. Have you, in your time in DC, collectively seen growth in the size of the congressional staffs as the number of responsibilities may change, or is it pretty consistent?
Pretty consistent, yeah.
It's pretty consistent. I think.
Personal staff are
Person-
limited.
yeah.
They're capped.
They're-
Personal
they're-
staff
yeah.
you can't hire anymore. So personal staff are capped at a certain size.
Committee staff, at least on the appropriator side, I have not seen any growth.
Yeah, we haven't seen much growth either. I think where you would see the growth in the size of the portfolio is when there are major changes within the executive branch. So, for example, with the stand-up of DHS 10 or 12 years ago, that would be huge. Some of the changes that have occurred in Department of Veterans Affairs, has added, workload to the staffers. But, I mean, you're set by, there's caps on the number, there's caps on the budget, so everybody just does more if necessary. Yeah.
How is the location of the Space Force?
Mixed, I think. The basic question that the Hill has is why? Like what is driving, the need to do this? And I think there isn't a definitive answer that I think passed the first 2 or 3 conversations. You know, you can talk about the threat and the changing nature of space, you know, as part of a reason for more focus. But, you know, once you get 2 or 3 layers into it, I think it's kind of less and less definitive, which has been a little bit of a struggle on the Hill. So I think most of them, I would kind of characterize the marks as being cautious and thoughtful.
Mm-hmm.
Would be Congress's response in the bills right now.
The HASC and the SASC both authorize a Space Corps or a Space Force. They use different language, and they structure it differently. The House Appropriators said, here's $15 million. Is it 15 or 30?
I think it's
15. Here's $15 million. Go study it some more. We don't authorize you to stand up a force. I think that there is justified concern over the bureaucracy that could be created with the stand-up of a Space Force. And it's not to say that they are not going, that they're not supportive and they're not going to do it and they're not going to let this happen, but I think they need a better understanding of what it's going to look like from a bureaucratic standpoint.
Other questions?
Okay, then last couple minutes, ladies, do you mind providing the one thing you would like them to take away from today?
I think we should do reverse order from this morning.
Oh, well, but now I have mine. No, because it took me a while to get there, and so I passed the baton on. No, just the idea, and we've been over this a lot today, and it goes back to that square inch where you have commonality, right? Is understanding that your level of understanding is very in depth and too in depth for the staffer, and that you need to find that common ground and bring it up higher, and understand, like I laid out that from the analyst up to Congress and all of those layers in between, and each successive layer, that person knows less and less about your program. And so when you reach those two extremes, having a conversation between those two can be very difficult.
So for me, it boils down to one word: do your homework. Know your audience that you're speaking to, whether that's the congressman, their personal staff, whether that's DC or the district office or the professional staff. Know who you're talking to, be able to justify everything that's in your slides, you know, either a slip-in schedule or the numbers that are in the presentation that you're promoting or talking to. So do your homework.
I would say engage. You know, if you have the opportunity to engage with a member of Congress or with a staffer, whether it's socially or in a briefing setting, you know, don't be afraid of Congress. You know, we've put this huge mystique and this kind of big, skull and crossbones when it comes to Congress, but they're just people trying to do their job. You know, as long as you've done your homework and you understand what their job is, they're just people trying to, do their thing just like you are. So take the opportunity and engage when you can.
So thank you, ladies, for coming. It was a wealth of knowledge. It was very beneficial in both sessions. Hopefully you all learned something from this. So let's just give them all a round of applause, and hopefully they'll come back.